Liz. How are you doing? I know a little under the weather recently. Hopefully you're feeling better.
I'm better. No excuses at this point.
That's great to hear. Well, we're really happy you're doing better because you get to be here with us and chat about impact players. I'm excited, and I know our audience is as well. Hello again to all of our attendees. I'm Ronak Shet, the founder and CEO of Videobooks. If you're not familiar with Lit, we make reading best-selling business books as entertaining as watching a movie or a documentary. If you want more info, stay tuned until the end of the chat. But for now, let's settle in and focus on a wonderful conversation with the one and only Liz Wiseman. We're going to be talking about cultivating the impact player mindset. And we're going to save the last 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So, you just saw the Slido link that was shared in the chat. Please share your questions there and upvote any that you find interesting so that we can get a pulse of what you want Liz to address. So Liz, your company, the Wiseman Group, helps an impressive array of companies with employee and leadership development. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background and passion for this? How did you get into this space?
Oh, well, you know what? I finally have the job after, I don't know, I've been in the workforce for like 30 something years. And I finally have the job I was trying to get out of college. So when I came out of college, I wanted to teach leadership. And I went and tried to get a job for the premier leadership training company in the United States. And they were like, hey, you seem great, Liz, but if you want to teach leadership, why don't you like go learn how to lead first? Like, why don't you go like go manage people before you try to do this? And I thought that was a terribly short-sighted view. Like I'm like, oh, they don't understand what I'm excited about, what I'm passionate about. They don't get me. And boy, I'm so grateful I was rejected from that job, and they sent me off to go work. And I landed at Oracle Corporation, and it was a young, rapidly growing software company, and I got thrown into management a year into my career. And so I got a lot of experience managing. And funnily enough, I was managing the training and learning function for this big global, what became this behemoth of a software company. And so I had all this experience in managing the learning process and the training process. And now I'm training people how to be good leaders and managers. So my career has, kind of flipped, and it's also come full circle back to where I began. And, I'm thinking there's the T.S. Eliot quote, and I don't have it right. Ronak, you might be able to help me out with this, but it's like, and the end of all of our wanderings is to come back to where we began and know the place for the first time. And I feel like that is my career, is I'm finally coming back to where I wanted to start, and I know it. And I know how hard it is. And that's really drives my work, is helping people be really great leaders and create environments where people love work.
That's a wonderful mission, and I think many companies have implemented both multipliers and impact players to help with that very mission. And for could you maybe explain a little bit about what inspired you to write impact players as kind of a follow up to multipliers?
Mm. Well, it was really the other side of the coin. I had spent a decade out working with managers, with corporations, trying to help people lead in a way that allowed people to contribute fully. And I think that's one of the things I learned in that process is a leader is a major factor in whether or not someone has a job where they're kind of phoning it in, going through the motions, doing the minimum, and experiencing a role they would say is frustrating and tiring, versus a role where people are deeply utilized and deeply engaged, and work is hard, but it's interesting and fun and exhilarating, and it's this like build-up experience. And so I'd been out there teaching leaders how to do this for a decade. And then I start to realize that, the leader is a factor, but they're not the only factor. And it also is a function of how the individual shows up. It's also a function of the talent, not just the mindset of the leaders, but the mindset of the contributors. And maybe there was one particular moment, like this is sort of where Veronica, kind of came into focus for me, is I'm out teaching a multipliers workshop, and I think this was at Salesforce up in San Francisco, and this one manager, he like, I don't even know if he raises his hand. He just like blurts out like, okay, I get it. Like, I want to be a multiplier. One of these leaders who bring out the best in others, check out the video book on that. But he says, but you can't multiply zero. And I'm like, I'm like slack-jawed over this, because I think what he's saying is, I got a bunch of dummies working for me. Like, what do I do with that? And I'm like, I don't think Salesforce hires a bunch of dummies. And then I start to realize he's saying something entirely different. What he's saying is, because he goes on to explain it, he says, yeah, I get it. Like, as a leader, I have to bring the right mindset and practices to create this environment. But all the people on my team also need to bring the right mindset and practices. Like, what's that part of the equation? And that's where I began to look at the role of the contributor, and very particularly the difference between people who are working hard versus people who are having an extraordinary impact, who are making a difference, who aren't just position holders in organizations, they're difference makers, and their work experience is very different, and their work life feels very different. And so that's really what led to this study. Unanswered questions.
Thank you for sharing that inspiration. And we're very lucky to have you here so we can dive in and pick your brain on this more. So as everyone knows, we released Impact Players as a video book recently, and have tons of positive feedback from clients and organizations who are incorporating the video book in various groups in their organizations. Liz, what did you think of the video book?
Well, that's an unfair question, because no one likes to watch a video book that has footage of them in it. So other than the parts with me, I thought it was great. Like, the work that the Lit Video team does is brilliant, and the graphics and of course, as an author, you look at it and go, how did they end up doing in 30 minutes what it took me like 80,000 words? And then of course you think of the adage, pictures worth 80,000 words. So yeah, no, I think it does an amazing, and I thought the same thing with the Multipliers video book. I'm like, how did they do that in 30 minutes? I can't do that. I can't give a talk in 30 minutes that covers as much ground. So yeah, bravo.
Thank you. And thanks to the Lit Videobooks team. We couldn't have done it without your interview, even though you may not enjoy watching yourself on screen. I know all of our audience absolutely will. And in the video book, you talk about how certain individuals with organizations make a huge difference, a significant difference, and how impact players can be found in all walks of life, not just in a corporate setting. We start off the video book by illustrating this idea, so we're going to go ahead and play a clip to introduce everyone to the video book.
The night of October 1st, 2017, a lone gunman opened fire on an open-air concert.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
And it was the largest mass casualty incident in the United States.
We got shots fired at 4:15 ASF. It sounded like an automatic firearm.
That night, there were 850 people who were injured. 422 of those injuries are gunshot wounds. And that night, 250 severely wounded individuals came in through the emergency bay at Sunrise Hospital, where Dr. Kevin Menes was on staff, the lead emergency physician.
Shots fired from Mandalay Bay. There's many people down, stage left. Just be advised.
As soon as he hears this grim and grisly news, he gets a hold of the administration of the hospital.
and asks them to call all available physicians in the area, get them down to the hospital. He instructs the staff, clear out all of the rooms, all of the hallways. They announce on the loudspeaker in the hospital, anyone capable of pushing a gurney should report to the emergency bay. Well, he then stands there at the emergency bay to run triage, to assess each patient. Typically, they would assess a patient and then assign them a severity level, green being the least severe up to yellow and orange and red being the most severe, someone who is in danger of losing their life in minutes or seconds. Well, in this moment, he knows that there's no time to tag all of the hundreds of patients who are going to come in. He tagged rooms. This would be the green room, the yellow room, the orange room, the red room, so we could have the right staff and the right medicines and the right equipment in those rooms. When there are more patients than staff available to treat, he turns the triage role over to the most capable nurse, and he says, "You've been watching me. You know what to do in this moment." He then goes to that red room. As doctors are starting to come in, his instruction to them was clear and simple and powerful, which was find dying patients and save them. That night, the surgical team performed 67 life-saving surgeries within a period of 6 hours. By sunrise, 215 patients have been treated and then are now in outpatient care. Hundreds of lives were saved. He defined his role as a problem solver. Impact players not only make great plays, they make everyone else on the team better.
It's a very tragic and moving story, Liz. I think it really illustrates how valuable it is to have people that can step up and take the lead when needed. Could you share with us what specifically defines an impact player and what sets people like Dr. Menez apart?
Well, and I think there's, Dr. Menez's story is powerful. I read about it in Emergency Monthly, and I do not know why I was reading Emergency Monthly, but I was, and I stumbled onto his story, and there's two ways you can look at it. One is like, what a brilliant physician, making all these like in the moment decisions and handling the stress so brilliantly. But that's actually not the real story. The story is that Dr. Menez had been thinking about this for a long time. He knew Las Vegas could potentially be a target. And so he thought, what would we do if we didn't have a couple gunshot wounds come in a given night? What if it were dozens? I'm not sure he even contemplated hundreds, but he's thinking about the unthinkable, and he's thinking like, what would we do? We couldn't tag patients. We couldn't, do A, B, C, and D. We couldn't wait for images to be read. We would have to get the radiologists down there. We wouldn't have enough ventilators. How would we share the ventilators? And this is one of the things we noticed in the impact players is they not only defined their role as a problem solver, they were anticipating problems. In that little clip, I'm referencing something I heard from Nick Saban, who is the I don't know, is one of the most winning coaches in football history, maybe in sports history. So this is Nick Saban, who just recently retired from, the head coach of Alabama, Roll Tide, with an incredible track record. And I had a chance to ask him, like, what is an impact player? And he thought about it and he said, well, good players make plays. And great players like make good plays consistently, but the impact players, they make everyone on the team better. And it's really the difference between people who are working hard versus people who are having an extraordinary impact, both on the work, on the people that they serve through their work, and on the aspirations and capability and climate of a team. Things get better around these folks.
That's wonderful. I think while a lot of people in the audience are not ER doctors, I think they can probably identify an impact player or they may be one themselves. I guess Liz, could you provide an example of how in a corporate setting someone might practically apply, you know, being an impact player into their role?
For me, I think the most concrete difference between the ordinary contributor and the impact player is captured in the first practice. And you know what, Ryan, I want to step back from this and just share just a little nugget about the research we did. We didn't go into the corporate world to understand like what are the high performers doing versus the low performers. What we looked at was the difference between equally hardworking, equally capable, equally talented individuals. And it was the difference between those who were working hard versus those that were making an extraordinary impact. Um, and I think this is really important for us right now because just working harder isn't an option and it's not a healthy option. But one of the first differences we found between the ordinary contributor and the impact player is the ordinary contributor is doing their job and often doing their job really, really well, like a great, emergency department physician, versus the impact player is doing not just their job, they're doing the job that's needed, which means they're paying attention to the white space in the organization, the stuff that falls between the crack, the stuff that's really nobody's job. Yesterday, I was interviewing for some research. I was interviewing someone from Eli Lilly, and I was so struck by what this one VP said. He ran an operational area of the company, and he said, in my job description, there's like this thing that says like 5% of, anyone's job is 5% like is as specified, kind of like a catch-all, like, hey, be prepared that there's just this like other category. And he said, for me, that's 90% of my job. And I think that is the mentality of this impact player. It's figuring out what needs to be done and then pointing yourself toward it.
That's really interesting. I think super, super important role in any company for people to be able to step up and be impact players. A bit later on in the video book, you say an impact player isn't just a label reserved for certain people. It's, a mindset and it's an attitude. Could you explain more about what this means? We're going to dive into it in more detail later, but if you could explain kind of at a high level that means.
It's about a way of thinking. That's what a mindset is. It's a way of thinking which directs a way of working. And, a lot of leadership literature or training focuses on here are the practices, here are the habits of good leaders. Here's what you should do. But I think what's more powerful that it's here's how we should think about something, because when we think about something, everything else just follows and it tends to flow really naturally. And so this is about the beliefs behind the behaviors. And, throughout the video book and the book, I talk about the impact player mindset, which is this kind of set of assumptions and beliefs that impact players tend to hold. Beliefs like, well, I don't have to be in charge to take charge. Like, or my boss isn't really in charge of my work. I'm in charge of my work. In some ways, it's channeling our inner 3-year-old. Like you're not the boss. Well, I think that's probably more like 5 or 6. It's like, when the little kids say, hey, you're not the boss of me. It's like they've got to that point in life where they figure out they have agency and they don't have to stay where you tell them to stay. Like they get to decide a lot of things. And so it's this heightened sense of agency, of I can take control of situations. Like I see myself in service. And I think that was one of the other themes I saw throughout this was this mindset of I'm here to serve. Like you don't have to work in customer service to have this orientation of like my work serves people. It serves individuals. It serves society. Maybe it serves the person in the cubicle next to me who has to take my work and then add value on top of that. So it's this set of powerful beliefs and what I found to be these 5 practices, kind of hitting them briefly. It's the difference between doing your job and doing the job that's needed. It's the difference between waiting for direction and stepping up and taking charge of a situation. It's the difference between handing emergent problems off to higher ups versus, getting those things across the finish line, not because you're doing it solo. It's because in some ways you're just the boss. Like it's the difference between saying, "Hey boss, we've got a problem. Here you go." Versus, "Hey boss, we've got a problem. I'm on it. And here's what I need you to do for me so I can get this thing across the finish line." A lot of it is kind of assuming we have power and can take control of situations. The fourth difference is, when the environment's changing, do we stick to what we know or do we adapt, adjust, pivot? And lastly, when the workload feels heavy and hard, do we end up adding to that burden or do we make work light for others, for ourselves, which is so key to this difference between having impact and just efforting things.
Yeah, I can really see how any people manager would yearn for this sort of attitude in their team. I guess one question that comes to mind for me is how does someone toe the line between being an impact player and taking ownership and kind of looking ahead and being able to see what might be valuable to the organization and also being, respectful to their manager and not kind of overstepping, and assuming power when perhaps they may not have the power that they're actually trying to take on. How do you kind of toe that line?
Yeah. So here's what I don't think it is I don't think it's the proverbial bull in the china shop. It's not the person who has to always be in charge. In fact, what we found, this difference between those who wait for direction versus those that take charge, it's not that they just step up and take the lead. It's it's more dynamic, it's more fluid than that. They step up and lead, but they step back with as much comfort and grace with which they step up. Nobody likes working with the colleague who always has to be the boss. They have to be the boss of every meeting. Like, we know what it's like. Nobody likes working with these people, unless you've given up like all will to like have agency and make decisions. There are people who go into a meeting where, it's like clearly there's a collaboration going on here, but we're not quite sure who's in charge. And for me, this feels like every third meeting that I'm in, where you look around, you're like, okay, we've got a bunch of minds here, but like, who's in charge of just the next 60 minutes? And it's the kind of person who doesn't just step in and take charge and drive that. They might do something like, hey, would it be helpful here if I laid out some objectives for this? Like, hey, I'm willing to facilitate this conversation. Would that be helpful? So it's willing to lead, but also willing to pass the baton to someone else. I very much like to think of it like a flock of migrating geese, where there's not a single alpha bird at the front of that V formation that does all the leading, all the a hard work of creating that formation and that drag that allows a flock to fly efficiently. They do their service, they're at the front, and then they fall back and another bird comes to the front. It's very much like the kind of way we look at leadership in third grade. Now, Rona, can you remember like third grade? Can you remember back to like your primary school days? Like, leadership rotated. It was like, okay, there's like a chart of all the jobs and duties and all the like leadership responsibilities, which kids tend to like. And it's like it rotates every week and everyone has a turn, which means no one person tends to be a tyrant. And it's this assumption that everyone can provide leadership. You don't need to be at the top of the organization, the top of the class, so to speak, to do that. So it is this assertive way of leading and working, but that assertiveness is balanced with checking in. So let's say you've got a job, but there's a job over here that needs to be done. Like there's this emergent problem. There's this unmanned kind of opportunity or issue. You don't just abandon your post and just decide, well, this is my job. It's like, you know what? Hey, boss, we've got this issue over here. I'm going to put this on the back burner and I'm going to go address that. Does that make sense? Thank you. Yes. Like, hey, I'll cover for you over there. It's like, hey, would it be helpful if I took the lead here? It's like, hey, I'll get this done, but here's what I need you to do so that we can get this done. So it's this assertiveness done in service of high impact work that makes it easy for other people to follow these kind of emergent leaders.
Well, I hadn't thought about it that way. Thank you for kind of sharing that in more detail. And I wanted to chat a little bit about some of the stories that we heard in the video book. So, Liz, in the video book, you share examples of how a few individuals kind of stepped up to create outsized impact. And Sabine Kairala, apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, story is one in particular that really stood out. A few years ago, Sabine worked as a brand manager at Unilever and caught wind that there was going to be a delay in a product launch due to a manufacturing issue. And so let's watch a clip from the video book that shows how she decided to play bigger in this moment.
There was a lot riding on this technology. We wanted to be the first to market, to launch it. And then I was informed by my supply chain team that there was a production delay and that the launch would be delayed by months. And we unfortunately wouldn't be able to deliver to the promise that we had given leadership on launch timelines. I was very disappointed, but then I decided to act on it. And I was, very curious about why the supply chain was delayed. So I called the supply chain manager who was in the factory in Indonesia. I was saying to him, I'm your new best friend and you don't know it. We started this partnership, this really unexpected partnership. He started breaking down where there were challenges and we started solving them together one by one. I didn't know the answers, I just kind of helped him get there. Through it, we managed to launch on time. So we found a way to kind of solve the problem. We were the first to market and, everyone was very happy because it was a multi-million-dollar kind of revenue generating project.
This initiative and passion to expand her scope shined through the corporate ranks.
In the eyes of my leadership, they were very, impressed and happy that I took that ownership to, go beyond my marketing scope and actually influence supply chains. It paid off in so many levels.
Today, she's at Google as the head of ads marketing for acquisitions in the Asia Pacific.
That sense of agency, no one has to give you that authority. Nobody has to tell you, you just decide. And it's amazing when you do that, how fulfilling the work is, how productive you feel.
Great work by Sabine. Love that story and the amount of ownership she took in. Thank you, Sabine, for participating in the video book. She has great pride in how she tackled this issue and found a solution, and I think really went above and beyond. You've had extensive experience working with leaders and organizations. How can leaders identify and nurture potential impact players like Sabine within their teams?
Well, Google does a great job of this. It didn't surprise me. This happened when she was at Unilever. It didn't surprise me that she's at Google today because Google is a company that is very thoughtful about the profile of people they're looking for. So if you want to build a team of impact players, there's sort of the easiest way, there's a harder way, and then there's probably the most practical way. So the easiest way, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but the easiest way is just hire people who already think and work this way. Like Sabine is an example of this. I remember her telling me that kind of the way that she worked was really a function of what her parents taught her. And, they taught her to be strong. She was also like a collegiate basketball player. She grew up in Dubai. She's Lebanese, and she just grew up with this sense of strength. And I think it was like her father, her mother said, like, you should, like, don't ever work for anyone else. Like, work for yourself. Like, you're your own boss. And so she carried this through. So she's someone who like entered into the workforce kind of already thinking and working this way. Like, you can be purposeful about hiring people with this mentality. And, what you're looking for is not just a track record of the behavior and the impact that follows. You're looking for people who have this native mindset. And if you were looking for one thing, like if I had to look for one thing to hire a bunch of impact players, I would look for people who are comfortable with ambiguity. Where they see messy problems and they don't back away. They don't wait for someone else. They call like clean up on aisle 13, or they go to aisle 13. People who, when they see the big wave coming, they don't run for shore. They dive through it. So you're looking for people I don't know that anyone likes ambiguity. I certainly don't. I like things to be nice and tight and, all fit in a nice little table and Sudokus that line up. Like, I prefer that. But to get that, you have to go into ambiguity and make sense of it. And that is actually the easiest path through it. Is not around ambiguity, it's through it. So you can hire a bunch of people. That's the easiest way. The hardest way is, as a leader, to decide you are going to personally coach and develop each person on your team to be more of an impact player. Now that can work. It may not work for everyone. But that can work. But that's a fair bit of effort, probably the most practical leverage way, because I realize most managers don't get to go hire a dream team. Most people kind of inherit a team, like, okay, here's, so-and-so, this is Joe, he's the boss's nephew, and like you kind of get handed this team. And I actually love that scenario, because for me, it's a lot like parenting. It's like, I didn't get to pick my kids. Like, I didn't get to say, well, gee, I'd like someone with a mental level IQ and someone with like runway good looks and Olympic, build. Like, no, like my kids are just like me, kind of like a mixed bag. And your job as a parent is to kind of help people be the best versions of themselves and who they are. And I think management is a lot like this. So if you've got this mixed bag and you can't assemble a dream team, well, what do you do? Well, you might think about, like, do you have some impact players on your team? Do you have people who think and work this way naturally? And then how do you build an environment where those people can be admired, but not envied, where their way of thinking can be contagious, it can spread. And, essentially you start like, it's a bit like making sourdough. You're going to need some starter for that, some starter talent, and then create a culture where that kind of behavior spreads. And one of my favorite examples of this, I heard it from Nick Saban, who heard it from Mike, oh goodness, like most people, I can't say his name very well. Coach K, most people call this, incredible winning basketball coach, Coach K, Krajewski, I think is how you say his last name.
I think, yeah.
What is it?
I'm also going to butcher it, so it's probably
that's why everyone calls him Coach K. And yeah, we could put like someone on mic, unmute someone who could actually pronounce his name properly. But, he tells the story of the Olympic basketball team, the US team, sending the Redeem team off to the Olympics in 2012. And they were holding their practice, conditioning practice, prior to the Olympics in Las Vegas. And I'm not sure who made that decision. I personally don't think that's a great place to assemble a team to get them like game ready to go to the Olympics. But, it's like the first, day of practice, and it's early in the morning. It's like 5, 6 in the morning. And a lot of the players, maybe most of the players, are coming into the lobby, headed up to their rooms because they've been out, partying all night. And then there's Kobe Bryant, who's coming down the elevator into the lobby, headed for the weight room to go train. And they're like, dude, what's up? Like, and he's like, hey, I came here to win, and we need to like reclaim this title. And he says, I'm going to the gym, and then the next day there's a few more people in the gym. And by the end of the week, everyone's in the gym and everyone's getting their head in this game, going in like at their peak. This is an example of like this impact player mentality spreading across a team. And that, I think, is what managers can most easily do, is figure out how to make that kind of leadership natural and contagious.
That's a wonderful story, Kobe, but truly a legend and sorely missed. So Liz, on this thought, the concept of leaders, encouraging employees to step up in this era of, maybe you could call it quietly quitting. Could you maybe give us some advice on how managers can approach this, and talk a little more about that dynamic of kind of how could you apply kind of the right type of pressure and inspiration without kind of ending up having people quit because you're kind of trying to create too intensive a work environment or something of that sort?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a worse scenario than people quitting. It's people who are quitting and then staying inside of an organization. And, I look at that and think, I understand why people do that. But I also understand the danger of doing that, not to companies. That's obvious. But I think it's a dangerous path for building a great work life. But it makes sense when, we've come out of an environment, and it makes sense coming out of the pandemic. And clearly when managers respond to gaps between current capability and the impact or the results they're trying to deliver by asking people to do more. And, we have for, I don't know, decades, maybe millennium being asked people to do more and more with less. Well, that is a really fun challenge for a day or two. Like maybe you can get me like 2 weeks on the do more with less program before that's just exhausting and it feels futile. And people say, yeah, I'm just going to do less with less. This, building a team of impact players and showing up to work with this impact player mentality is not about doing more. It's about having greater impact for the time you're spending at work. It's like more units of impact for the units of effort. Asking people just to do more, it's particularly unpopular right now, but, that's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to unwellness. There's mental health implications for that. But inviting people to have a bigger impact is different. And it's offering people not an environment of burnout, but an environment that people describe as, okay, that was a little bit tiring, but totally exhilarating. And I think it's also about inviting people not to have a greater impact because the organization needs it or because their management needs it, because the KPIs or whatever require it. I think it's about offering people a better way of working, a more liberated way of working. I've spent a lot of time, particularly kind of in this environment where some people are quietly quitting, thinking about the implications it has for work and people's work life. And I think each one of these impact player practices helps build a great work life. We've been doing some research on this and studying like what are the most important components of a great work life. And, all of those top values that people have for like, this is what I want out of work. Like, I want more autonomy. I want to be able to control when and where I work. I want to be my own boss. I want to be able to direct myself and not be micromanaged. Well, when you finish strong and you're known for someone who gets it across the finish line, you get a lot of space, a lot of freedom. You don't need to be micromanaged. You get to be your own boss. Like that's the gift back to you. If you are willing to not just do your job, but to do the job that's needed, well, then you get to do more meaningful work, and you put yourself on a path of being able to solve the most interesting problems and being able to handed the work that has the greatest impact. If you want to be seen as a respected leader, stepping up and taking charge, like those are the people we respect. Those who don't earn their leadership through authority, they learn it through influence. You're going to build that reputation as a respected leader. One of the things people rate most highly is, I want to keep learning and growing. Well, that's what you get when you're, adapting and adjusting to change rather than sticking to what you know. And the thing that people say is number one importance right now in building a great work life is, I want to have work-life balance. Well, when you take this orientation of like, I'm going to make work light for others, and I'm going to make work light for myself, like you help a whole team build a mentality of how do we do the most with the least amount of effort, not with the fewest resources, but how do we simplify work? How do we downsize meetings rather than downsize teams? Like, how do we have this conversation in 10 minutes rather than an hour? How do we bring fun? How do we make hard stuff just feel fun? So I think it's really
wonderful.
about
Yeah, I think
building a great, not just a great career for yourself, a great work life.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, especially we're a startup, right? And so everyone, I think is constantly facing a long list of things that they could be doing. And I think really identifying what are the things that, the company needs that can help the company move forward, is an art that you can kind of develop over time. And I think the way you framed it is really helpful. And we want to play one more clip here that dives into a few of the tactics on how to kind of develop the impact player mindset. Uh, in this clip, you explain the two kind of key skills to achieve this mindset with the help of some fun props. So we're going to go ahead and watch one more clip here.
If you want to increase your impact, master the underlying beliefs of impact players with these two master skills. The first is changing your perspective.
It's this ability to get outside of your own view, your own experience, your own opinion, and look at a situation through the lens of those who are really served by your work and those who you work with.
This helps us increase our understanding of priorities and needs and see where we can step up. Some ways we can change our perspective is by zooming out, changing seats, and listening longer. The second master skill to develop an impact player mindset is changing your lens.
Impact players tend to look at situations that other people find uncomfortable, and they tend to look at it through what we call opportunity goggles. It's about putting on this set of lens and finding this opportunity to add value. Now we find that the impact players, at least the ones in our study, this lens came pretty natural for them. But that doesn't mean it comes natural for us, and it doesn't mean it has to be your first lens. We find that, most of us look at these things and we kind of look at them through what I might consider to be a threat lens. This feels like hot, fire, threatening. It's something to avoid and get away from. I think this, for most of us, is our natural lens. There is nothing wrong with seeing the threat in these situations. What we find impact players do is they just don't stay very long in the threat lens. They're able to take that off, stay calm enough to say, okay, now if I put on this new lens, what does this look like?
We can change our lens by recognizing ambiguity, checking internal lenses, reframing the situation, and being intentional about replacing lenses.
Love how fun that was with the sunglasses and the props. So Liz,
I brought my opportunity. I brought some other opportunity goggles. I thought you might ask me about this.
I like the green ones. So Liz, what are some of the kind of practical exercises or habits you would recommend for someone that wants to develop this proactive mindset of an impact player?
Well, I'll give you a few micro practices, very small things you can do. The first, it's part of like doing the job that's needed. Is I just call it like get on the agenda. And I don't mean like get on the agenda for the meeting. It's that in every organization there's an agenda. And I also don't mean like I've got a knife behind my back kind of agenda. I mean the agenda for like, here's what's important. And here's what's important now. Now, in some companies, this is well articulated and everyone knows, the goals and such, but usually this is constantly in flux and changing. It's being able to see the agenda and then ensuring that you're working on the agenda. One of my favorite examples of this, we did a really early workshop on this, and there was someone in this session who was like a music director for a big church. And he said, I don't think I'm on the agenda. And I'm thinking, like, how can a music director not be on the agenda? And he's like, no, I don't think I'm working on what's most important to the senior pastor. I'm like, well, how do you know that? And he's like, because he doesn't answer any of my emails. Every week, I write this email, which is like, hey, here's the work I did this week. And it's crickets. Like, I hear nothing. And I'm like, ooh, try this. I said, when you send the next email, I just want you to do two things in that email. Number one, describe what you understand to be the most important work of the organization right now. I call this the win, like what's important now. Just like sum up what you understand to be important to the organization, important to him. And I said, number two, I just want you to then kind of articulate what you are doing to further that. Very simple, just 2 steps. He writes back after a couple of weeks. He's like, okay, that was magic because like my emails are getting answered. I'm now getting like coaching and positive feedback and support. So that's one of the things that we can do is just let people that we know, our clients, our bosses, our collaborators, like, here's what I understand to be important and here's what I'm doing about that. You will also be seen as someone who understands what's vital and who's pointing themselves toward what's vital. Number two, you might need to invite yourself in to certain conversations. I know a lot of us think, oh, I could contribute to that. I have something to say about that. Like, I wish someone was asking me to work on that. And, we can sit around and I don't know, like be sort of a barista in Hollywood, wait for a director to come along and discover us. Or, we can go and show up in some of those places. The most important work I ever did at Oracle in my 17 years I spent there was never work that was part of my job. And it was never work someone gave to me. It was always work where I said, hey, I think I can help with this. And I wiggled my way into the project, not like storming the corporate board meeting and, making a speech, but just saying, I'm good at this. I can help with that. And the next thing I know, I'm put in charge of really vital pieces of work. You might need to invite yourself in to some meetings or just check to see, like, would it be okay if I contribute? One of my favorite simple practices, if you want to finish stronger, it's not about the finish. It's about how we start. The next time someone gives you a piece of work, stop and ask 3 questions. Like, never start a piece of work unless you know, like, what does a great job look like? What's the impact we're trying to have? How will I know I'm done? Like, how will we know we've crossed the finish line? Like, what should I not concern myself? Like, get yourself a nice, tight little statement of work so you know what success looks like. I don't even care so much what the 3 questions are. Just stop and ask a few questions so you know what a strong finish looks like. If you want to adapt and adjust quickly, you might take the simple practice of just make one tweak. Like when you finish a report or a presentation, you might just ask, what's one thing I could change to make that better? It's such an easy ask, and it's so easy for people to, it's hard for people to give you feedback, but it's easy for someone to say, oh, here's one thing you could do. And if you're doing that constantly, you're going to stay on target. Maybe one of my favorites is like, be someone who's known for downsizing meetings, not expanding meetings. Like, you know what? I don't think we need an hour for this. Let's just schedule 30 minutes. You know what? I need to check in with you. It's a stand-up meeting. We don't even need to take a seat. Like, give people a time rebate. Maybe that'll set a tone for the whole organization. And then, of course, you know, if you've got a situation that feels daunting, maybe you just say, you know, what does it look like through an opportunity lens? How is this an opportunity to add value, to reinvent how we do things, to take charge, to learn something new, to demonstrate leadership?
It's really interesting. And thanks for sharing a few of the tactics, Liz. I think we are getting close to time. I know we have a lot of questions, but would you be able to stay maybe 5 minutes over or so?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, before we jump into Q&A then, we want to share one more clip about high contribution work environments, or, you know, spaces where everyone feels safe to, you know, be excited and play big. So we're gonna play one more clip, get your feedback, and then head into Q&A.
People come to work wanting to contribute all of their intelligence, all of their capability. People want to play big. They don't want to join an organization where they're merely a box on an org chart. People take jobs because they want to be difference makers. And if you want a team of difference makers, not position holders, you need to create an environment where people can act with courage and act with impact.
Wiseman calls this type of space a high contribution environment.
I believe agency and choice is at the very heart of these high contribution environments, and it's at the very heart of what drives impact players. You see, in hard charging environments, managers demand, but in high contribution environments, managers create an environment for people to step up, to play bigger. Work's not a burnout experience, it's a build-up experience.
So Liz, what kind of tactics or advice would you have to kind of creating these environments, and you know, maybe even some advice on kind of how do you reward impact players so that they're kind of recognized and perhaps it inspires others to also be impact players?
Mhm. You know, I think it's seeing impact. I chose the term impact players over the concept of like an MVP. And I think in most organizations, we look at this and go, oh, there's certain MVPs, like really valuable players. And we see it very much as a noun, a person. But I think impact players is more like a verb, and it's more like a moment than a position. And it's recognizing like who was the impact player in that moment rather than who's the impact player on our team. Like, man, we just finished that project. Okay, so-and-so, like that was super like impact player kind of behavior, you know, atta girl. Here's like the impact player of that meeting, attaboy. It's like, it's recognizing what it looks like in the moment, more like the play or the game rather than the impact player on the team. And I think when we see it that way, we can recognize it in the moment with like spot recognition rather than this personnel designation. And I think that creates an environment where everyone can have impact, not just a few superstars.
Well, thanks so much, Liz. This has been incredibly insightful. Let's go ahead to Q&A. So I'm going to pull up a few of the questions here. So, all right, one of the first questions, what would you recommend for someone who sees what needs to be done, high impact to the bottom line and culture, but senior managers won't provide support?
You know, it's always possible that someone is doing something of high impact and senior managers won't provide support, that they might be really bad leaders, very poor vision, maybe even capricious, maybe even so, ego driven. But I think that that might be the minority. Here's what I found. I've been a senior executive. I've worked and coached a lot of senior executives. I do work today for a lot of senior executives, and I've learned this truth. I have never found a senior executive who wasn't willing to fund something that was important to them, or who wasn't willing to spend time on what's important to them. And I know for myself, when I've been frustrated that like someone in senior management wasn't getting behind one of my initiatives, it was because it was one of my initiatives. But when I have found what was important to them and made that important to me, I find that most of them are willing to join that parade. And so it might be that someone is working on something that has a lot of impact and a lot of value, but they haven't yet drawn the connections to how that maps to something that's really important to the senior executives. I once had someone at Oracle come to me and say, "Hey, Liz, can I take you to lunch? Because and we go to lunch and she's buying me lunch and she's like, hey, I have this initiative and I need to get senior management buy-in. And like, can you help me with this? Because like, you are the master of this." And I'm like, no, I don't know how to do that. Honestly, I can't help you. What do you mean you can't help me? I'm like, no, I've never done that. What I do is I find out what's important to them and I make that important to me. And then I find what I think is the best way to get that done. And then I pitch that to them. And the answer is almost always yes, because it's pitched like this is going to help you get what you're trying to get done. And so it might be how we maybe need to draw tighter connections to what's most important to them.
Super insightful. And there's so many questions here. I'm going to try to
Should I
get some
try to
different
be a
themes
little
in.
bit less verbose then in my answer?
No,
I'm
not
going to
at
try to
all.
downsize my answer.
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay, one more. So how do you change someone's mindset from this is above my pay grade to being that of an impact player?
Well, I think, again, I would start with the sense that we're not going to change everyone's mindset. And I don't know that we ever get to change anyone else's mindset. I think the 6-year-olds are right when they say, you're not the boss of me. That people have to decide that for themselves. And people are only going to take an expansive view of their role if it's done in an environment of trust, not like, gee, I want you to expand your role and then I'm going to like do a gotcha on you that you now didn't do something. Like when there's a win in there for them, when it's built on trust and when they benefit from that, not dissimilar to like executives get behind things that benefit them. It's the same with our team members. People get behind things. I get behind things that I can see a benefit to myself, not just a benefit to everyone else. So it's like one of my favorite authors. I just am delighted by him, Chris McChesney, who wrote The 4 Disciplines of Execution or something like this. One of his concepts is like, if you really want something to be well executed, you have to, as a leader, create a winnable game. Like, if people aren't going to win, they're not going to speed up, run the race. They're going to fall back and do the minimum. They're just going to do their job, say it's not in my pay grade. But if you can create a challenge that they can master, a game that they can win, that they benefit from, I find that most people do that. It is this truism. I've learned that people don't just want jobs. They want opportunities to contribute, to grow, to be smart. Like, how do we give people that? That's what people crave.
Absolutely. And I'm going to try to get to a few different themes here. So, one of the things you mentioned was so sometimes you inherit teams and other times you're in a manager position where you can hire an impact player. And so one of the questions here was, how can you recognize impact player mindset or comfort with ambiguity in an interview? Are there, specific questions that you've seen to be valuable and kind of, eliciting a response that it makes you think it's an impact player?
I love this question. And the answer to this, I learned from my good buddy, Ben Putterman, who is featured in this, the Video Impact Player book. I asked my buddy Ben, I'm like, hey, Ben, could you take these concepts from impact players? I knew he was hiring, he was at Rivian hiring this big string of people. I'm like, can you do me a solid and see if you can, use this criteria and hire people? And so he's like, I'm on it. And so he's got a dozen people he has to hire. And he calls me after about 4 or 5 interviews. He's like, Liz, I've noticed something really interesting. He says, because I am looking for people who have a comfort level with ambiguity. We're still sort of a startup that, EV market is changing really fast. I need people who can kind of pivot and adapt as the market is changing. And he said, so I'm asking people, kind of using behavioral-based interviewing techniques, asking people to describe a situation where they had to deal with ambiguity. And he said, I've noticed something. He said, some people kind of go like, oh, yeah, I had to deal with this, this, this. And he said, and then other people are like leaning forward and their body language change. And I can just see physically in their demeanor, their posture, in their countenance, they like this. Like no one likes it, but they thought it was an intriguing challenge and they mastered it. He said, those are the people who we did a second interview with. So try it. I'm sure it's one of other indicators. I loved it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, Ben, thanks to Ben for being in the video book as well. So, all right. Who are the leaders that inspire you today?
Oh, so that's the question for me?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a question for you.
who are the leaders who are inspiring me today? That's a hard question because I feel like right now I'm uninspired by a lot of leaders. We've had a Multiplier of the Year award for a number of years, and so I'm instantly going to some of those kinds of leaders, like John McNeil at Tesla was a leader who inspires me. Magic Johnson is still one of my favorite leaders. Like, the way he leads inspires me. The impact players we profiled in the book inspire me. I'm, starting a new research project and I've been out interviewing leaders at all levels and I come out of those just inspired. So I don't know that I have these like rock star leaders that I get attached to. I'm really inspired by everyday leaders who are trying to bridge this gap between like the high expectations that senior leaders have of them and the needs of Wall Street and all the demands that they're facing and the needs of their people and people who are hurting and suffering and those who hold that together and create environments where people don't mind coming to work or where they actually enjoy work and they come away from work like excited about the next day. Like those are the people who inspire me. So I don't know. I've just never had like big rock star kind of leader crushes.
That's even better. No, being continuously inspired, I think is even better. Right. All right. One more question, and then I think we will wrap up. So one of the questions here was, being the change you want to be can be scary or potentially even a lonely experience. If you're the first one to step out and stick your neck out on something, how can we enable others to go together with us?
I think back to this idea of a winnable game. And I think, I draw so much on what I've learned, not as a researcher, but a parent. And, I can't tell you how many times I've been like, kids, let's do this. Like, I want you to like go on this big hike or and I tried the path of inspiring like my kids with big aspirations. And I think a lot of corporate leaders do the same thing. They try to go big. Hey, let's do this big thing. Let's do this hard thing. Like, woo! And I find that where I've been able to help other people come along is in small steps. And it's not thinking about big aspirational goals, but like creating something that is within reach. And again, I really have seen this by studying this and interviewing people all around the world, is like people want to contribute. They want to play bigger. But if that's out of reach, or they're going to get their hand slapped, or the nail's going to get hammered down, they settle back. But when we can create small wins and lay out a series of small wins, then people build the confidence and capability to take on the hard things. So I think we're better served by thinking small than trying to think big.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for staying over time and being here with us today. Just wanted a few quick housekeeping items before we head off. So if you haven't done so yet, just check your registration confirmation emails, everyone, for complimentary access to the Impact Players video book. And make sure to follow our LinkedIn page or subscribe to our email for our next Fireside Chats. Next month, we'll be hosting Kim Scott, best-selling author of Radical Candor and Radical Respect. And of course, if you're interested in learning how Lit for Teams can ignite engagement and micro-learning in your organization, you and your learning development or HR or people teams can try Lit for free. You just go to our website and select Lit for Teams to learn more. And thanks again, Liz. Thanks again to everyone attending, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Ronak.